Welcome, good evening. That's nice, I like that. My name is Paul Grondahl. I'm the director of the New York State Writers Institute at the University at Albany. On behalf of the Writers Institute, University at Albany Theater Program, we're so glad that you're here with us tonight for the 25th annual Burian Lecture. A couple of announcements first. Thank you for wearing your face masks throughout this event. They're required inside all UAlbany buildings. Speakers on stage have permission to remove their masks. I also would like to remind you that this Wednesday evening at 7 p.m. in the Campus Center Ballroom, we'll welcome our 2022 Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. celebration speaker, Anthony Ray Hinton. Mr. Hinton spent 30 years on death row in Alabama for a crime he did not commit. He's the author of a memoir titled The Sun Does Shine: How I Found Life, Freedom, and Justice. I also want to say a very special thank you to Grayce Burian, who could not be with us tonight, unfortunately. Grayce is in her 90s now, but believe me, she is still a creative force. She and her late husband, Jarka, a former theater department chair and faculty member here at the university for nearly 4 decades, established the Jarka and Grayce Burian Endowment Fund. And it's been bringing acclaimed playwrights, directors, actors, theater professionals to campus for the annual Burian Lecture over the past 25 years. I want to send out a special thank you to our friend who will be watching tonight's event later on YouTube. So let me just say, waving to the camera, we love you, Grayce. I'll now turn things over to our wonderful collaborator, Kate Walat, Associate Professor, UAlbany Theater Program. Many of her students are here. So nice to see that. We had a wonderful afternoon event with them also. She's also resident playwright, has written many plays herself, and she'll introduce tonight's special guest. Come on up, Kate.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for being here this evening, and welcome to our annual presentation of the Burian Lecture Series. And hi, Grayce. Thank you again for your generous support. Playwright Jose Rivera has a list, 36 assumptions about writing plays, which he calls an unscientific, gut-level survey, in no particular order of importance. Number 5 reads, "We write plays in order to organize the despair and chaos, to live vicariously, to play God, to project an idealized version of the world, to remember and to forget, to lie to ourselves, to play, to dance with language, to beautify the landscape, to fight loneliness, to inspire others, to imitate our heroes, to bring back the past and raise the dead, to achieve transcendence over ourselves." And yes, his plays really do all that. Number 15 from his list reads, "You write from your organs, write from your eyes, your heart, your liver, your ass, write from your brain last of all." He has inspired a generation of playwrights, not only with his thoughts on writing, but also with his strong female protagonists, his representation of Puerto Rican characters, his musical and muscular language, his arresting images, and seemingly impossible theatricality, his political consciousness, and an unceasing commitment to his craft. He considers himself to be a guerrilla writer. He always carrying with him notebooks, so he can write, as he says, spur of the moment, when the time is right, then and there. Jose Rivera was born in Puerto Rico and came to the U.S. as a young boy. He traces his theater writing back to the stories he heard as a child around the kitchen table, recalling, "My grandparents, who were illiterate, lived with us, and the stories they told were often very fantastic, involving ghosts and devils. So I grew up with an access to that side of reality," adding that he's never learned any more about writing than he learned then. He knew from a very early age that he wanted to be a playwright, writing his first plays in high school. In college, he learned on his feet, each year writing, directing, and producing a play of his. He also learned from his experiences as a young actor. Being in a Chekhov play taught him about structure, acting in Shakespeare about language. He believes having to solve the problems of an actor is a great education for the construction of good plays. It was also in college that he discovered Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Reading 100 Years of Solitude, he says, suddenly everything that I grew up with was there on the page. The same love stories, stories of obsession, stories of interacting with spirits. As a young playwright, when Jose Rivera asked himself, what can I contribute that isn't already being done by 100 other writers? He realized, I can translate the magical stories of my childhood and my culture into theater. And so, embracing the style of magic realism, or mad realism as he prefers, he creates plays that have become his signature style. In his Obie Award-winning play Marisol, the angels have declared war against an old and dying god. And Jose Rivera's vision of an angel is a young black woman in ripped jeans and a leather jacket holding a machine gun. His play References to Salvador Dalí Make Me Hot opens with the moon standing on an old refrigerator playing the violin and lusting after the very real protagonist Gabriela, played by Oscar-winning actress Rosie Perez in its New York premiere at the Public Theater. As a playwright, Jose Rivera's list of awards and accolades include 2 Obie Awards, a Fulbright, grants from the NEA and Rockefeller Foundation. His plays have been produced around the world and translated into 6 languages. As a writer for film and television, his collaborations with film director Walter Salas include an adaptation of Kerouac's On the Road, as well as Motorcycle Diaries, for which he became the first Puerto Rican screenwriter to be nominated for an Academy Award. But he always returns to the theater when it comes to telling the kind of personal stories that audiences are so moved by, creating compelling characters that actors are dying to bring to life, and plays that are connected to or pushing up against the world we live in. At Theater Communications Group's 50th annual conference, the American Theater called on him as a leader in the field, and Jose Rivera responded. All I ask as an artist is this: give me space for my imagination and the time to construct a world there. And I ask for significance. I ask for urgency. I ask that our work means something, that our stories change things, that our cultures speak with greater force and eloquence than the big corporate culture of ones and zeros and yes and no and on and off. How? What do we focus on? Where do we find our urgency? I say it's everywhere, that we live in a golden age of possibility for culture and storytelling and music making and dancing. With such inspiring words and vision, we're so lucky to have him here at UAlbany today. Let's give a warm welcome to Jose Rivera.
Hi, Grayce. Thank you for that great introduction. So what we're going to do is perform a couple of short monologues. My partner, Sara Koviak, graciously came up from New York to read a couple of these monologues with me. So she's going to read 2 pieces from a recent play called Love Song Imperfect. Just briefly, the play takes place in a kind of dystopian future where the government is so powerful they can change the laws of nature. So in the beginning of the play, the government has outlawed death. Later on in the play, the government outlaws communion between the living and the dead, on and on. In the midst of this, there's a pair of lovers that keep trying to get together, but the government laws keep tearing them apart, and then eventually death tears them apart. So in this first speech that Sarah's going to read, her lover, Venizio, has passed away, and now she's living with the aftermath of his death.
Venizio! Do you hear that sound? Yeah, listen. That's the sound of the Earth's rotation. That rusty, squeaky spinning. It's so hard to hear sometimes. It sounds like crickets or rustling leaves. The noise is so primal and far away and sad. You can only hear it when you're absolutely alone in the world, when all of your loved ones are gone or silent. I don't hear you, dear Venezio. Not your laughter, or that painful little sigh you make after making love with me. I don't hear your sarcasm or your evasions and cheap jokes. You've broken free. You've escaped my arms and flown to older dimensions and erased your presence in our biosphere and left me to wander this dumb, unfinished house like a weak wind. I've been trying to hear the echoes of your words, hoping they'd still be bouncing around this tired house like magic rubber balls. Sometimes I think I hear those echoes. Your voice still attached to the space around me. Well, our space, our haven. I try to chase those echoes and catch them and stick them in my ear and hope that they wander down into my heart and fill it with you. But I think I'm only dreaming those things. But no, in my complete loneliness, all I hear is the rusted spin of the world, monotonous and shrill. They say only dogs and crazy people can hear that. I'm afraid that if I listen to it too much for too long, I will really lose my mind, dear Venezio. Yeah, he was an ass sometimes. God, I'm losing it. I can't eat. I can't stand to look at these unpainted walls and think of all their potential. All of the things they were supposed to represent. The babies, too. Jesus, Venezio, you ass! Why did you have to write that stupid petition and bring back death? Since death has returned to America, it's been an epidemic. Day and night, the guilt of our crimes, the stress of owning too much, the pain of being owned by our things, the fear of aging, the quest for perfection, the hunt for more and better, the noise of the constant communication, all of it's come crashing down on our heads. And everywhere, Americans are taking their own lives in unprecedented numbers. I'm losing my blessed mind. I couldn't stand that. Even when I've had nothing, I have had the ability to think straight and form perfect sentences. That's the last straw. Okay, so this next piece, a little brighter, it's in Act 5. So now the laws have changed a few more times, and now Delilah is in the afterlife. And so she's possibly going to search for Venezio. So she just got plunked into the afterlife. Yum! Venezio wasn't kidding. You can taste the light. Oh my God. Non-fat vanilla with a hint of cloves. Yummy. But which way is the world? I need to see what's going on with Dr. Gopnik. He did me such a favor. He got the laws changed for me. He got the government to bring back death. I gotta thank him for that. Oh yeah, that's illegal. Shit. Whoa. I know what the sky is thinking. I can read its amazing thoughts. Okay. Hey, Sky. Do you know where I can find my Venezio? He was my one true love on earth. About yay big, nice eyes, way too cute for his own good. There were miscommunications. We used the same language, but we were using alternative definitions to the words we spoke. It's a male-female thing down on Earth. You'd think after millions of years of evolution we would have worked it out by now, but that's the way it goes. There's been great progress in all fields of human endeavor except in the fields of love. Looks like we're still living in some reptile age of the heart. But now that I'm away from the place governed by day and night and gravity and sunlight and cause and effect, I think there might be hope for us. Out here in this awesome new dimension where all the senses get tangled up to make new rules, I think there might be hope for Delilah and Venezio and our reptile hearts. But what if there are as many places to be dead as there are people who die? And we're each exiled to our own lonely heaven, and I'm in like dimension 803.6, and he's in like dimension 47X, and the light between us, the space between us is light years across and filled with inhospitable thieves and ruffians. What if he's married to someone else? Some real skank bimbo hoe. Oh, that's just his type too. Or he's too old to remember me. Or he hates my guts for sleeping with Dr. Gopnik, even though I slept through the whole thing and I don't remember a single moment of it. Or he just doesn't care, and he's over me. Is that what's going to happen to me? Can I have a little guidance here? Can I have a sign?
This next excerpt is from a much older play called Sonnets for an Old Century, which is an adaptation of Edgar Lee Masters' Spoon River anthology. As in Spoon River, each of the characters in this play have recently passed away, and they tell a story. Some characters make confessions to God, some characters bargain, some characters are in denial, and this particular character decides to tell a story. I was looking down at the ocean. I was nervous. The ocean didn't frighten me. It was the sharpshooters. They patrolled the beach every half hour. Through the walls of the prison, they could be heard telling obscene jokes. Sometimes they were so bored, they would take target practice on the seagulls. They'd spend their entire complement of arrows on the seabirds. No, the ocean didn't frighten me. I loved heights. My love grew greater as the years of incarceration went by. Everything was far, far below us. The enemies who imprisoned us seemed no larger than ticks. Our prison was the tallest structure in the country. You could see it from 100 miles away. And everyone knew that my father and I, the most wanted criminals in the country, were trapped there, finally outsmarted. The genius and his only son, contained in stone and steel, a prison even his great mind couldn't outwit. Or so they thought. My father, of course, had other plans. At first, he wouldn't even trust me with his scheme, afraid maybe I'd break under torture and spill my guts. In the morning, he drew elaborate diagrams, study them all day, then destroy them every night for fear the guards would find them during their periodic raids of his cell. After a year in prison, my father started to ask the guards for extra candles. He was an avid reader and his eyes were going. The guards, rightfully suspicious, didn't pay him any attention. Then he went on a hunger strike, his 10th, I believe, and threatened to somehow contact the human rights groups monitoring our imprisonment. And this always freaked out the powers that be. And after nearly 6 months of strikes, near-death stalemates, and plain old-fashioned hardball, my father got what he wanted: 2 extra candles every night. I knew instantly that a plan was in effect. But he was subtle. He let another 6 months go by. Then my father started to complain that his shit was bloody. He requested that his diet be supplemented with grains. A month passed before he got what he wanted: a handful of grain. Then things started to pick up. My father would put the grain on the high ledge of his one window. Inevitably, a seabird would land and eat the grains. The opening was small, and my father would frighten the birds so suddenly they would flap their wings while still on the ledge, and inevitably the wild beating of wings against the stone windows would shake feathers loose, and the feathers would fall to the floor in my father's cell. This happened every day. And it was this way, slowly, that my father collected his treasure of white wings. And he would melt the wax from his 2 extra candles and glue those feathers together. And in a year's time, he had fashioned identical pairs of giant wings. Then we fasted until we each weighed less than 100 pounds. The day came. I was looking down at the ocean. I was nervous. The ocean didn't frighten me. It was the sharpshooters. They were on the beach that day, and again, bored and stupid, they were wasting their arrows on the hapless seabirds. When the tall one shot his very last arrow into the air, my father said, "Come on." Through a hole in the wall my father had patiently carved out of solid rock during the years of our incarceration, we barely squeezed ourselves in our mighty wings. As he predicted, the wind was northerly. For many years he had watched the patterns of the clouds, making mental notes filed away in the great cavern of that magnificent brain, and understood the rhythms of the air, of temperature, of clouds, and predicted this day would be cloudless, no rain, no lightning, no turbulence. We had to move fast. We climbed through the hole. We were outside for the first time in years. We strapped on our wings. The sharpshooter saw us. The fools started to shout commands. They started throwing rocks, but of course, the tower was much higher than any man can throw. And seconds after attaching the wings to our bodies, we were lifted by a current of air. When my feet left the ground, I gasped. I'd never known such a feeling. I started to involuntarily kick the air, as if that would help me fly higher and faster, but it only dragged me down, and my father told me to knock it off. "It's all in the arms," he said, and he demonstrated and was instantly high above me, flying homeward as if he had been born to it. I was astonished, and the energy of my astonishment was the power I used to lift myself above the prison tower, even as an army of sharpshooters arrived on the beach with their arsenal of crossbows. Now, at this point in the story, I have to stop to correct a misconception. It is believed by many people that it was arrogance and pride that attracted me to the sun that day and resulted in my downfall. No, it was not. It was something else altogether different that brought me down. The reason I faltered is this. I was sick of my father's perfection. I knew I carried his genes in me, knew my tendency to lose my temper, as well as my weak left eye, my natural suspiciousness all came from him. But the greater gifts, the gifts of the mind, those he hoarded and kept in the dark, locked tower of his superior IQ. And every day I tried to match him. I showed him my drawings, my escape plans, my elaborate and fanciful weapons. And every time he'd laugh at me, point out the obvious flaw in each of them and tell me not to bother myself because the strain would be too much for my inferior intellect. And of course, he was hatching a foolproof scheme. He'd smile at me, a condescending smile, the smile an animal trainer gives to his clever but limited chimpanzee, the smile I had to endure my entire life long. I had a right to think myself superior to him. My legs were longer, my eyes clearer, my endurance greater, but I didn't think myself superior. That tower was cold, always cold. As we flew upward into the blue air above the ocean, I flew straight for the sun. I flew toward what was warm, away from the cold father whose own heart was buried deep within its private labyrinth, inaccessible to all. Yes, I wanted to show him his invention was flawed, and I knew what that flaw was. I could hear him yelling, "You idiot! You fly too high! Don't fly so high!" "Why not?" I shouted back. "The wings! The wax will melt! You'll ruin the wings!" The wax melted. I fell out of the sky. I crashed into the ocean. I was rescued by fishermen off the coast of Maine in a coma. I came to, I begged my doctors to go out to sea and find the remains of my beautiful wings. I was pleasantly and firmly rehabilitated. I pretend to forget my childhood and my brilliant father and my one incredible flight over the sea, but I won't forget. Oh, that's my story. I tell it to everyone. I'm telling it to you. You don't have to believe me. I cleave to my story, imagining that somewhere nearby my father has again escaped death and is laughing brilliantly at all of us. Thank you. Well, that's our lecture. I hope you enjoyed it. We'd love to take some questions from the audience. Sara is a dancer, choreographer, and actress, and years of experience doing all three and teaching as well. So anything that you'd like to ask regarding... we have the mic?
Yep, I have a mic, so I can actually find people in the audience, too.
Yes, so if you would raise your hands.
Yeah, who'd like to start us off? Yeah. Okay. Okay, and you can stand up, too.
Hello. It's very good to meet both of you. I guess I would just like to ask, I'm a creative writer myself, and sometimes I sit and I'm like at the keyboard and I'm just have no idea what to write, and I have no idea what the next sentence should be or what even I want to write about. And I was wondering, how do you, when you see yourself like that in those situations, how do you cope with it? Like, what do you do to get through it?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, you know, at dinner earlier, we were talking with William Kennedy about Gabriel Garcia Marquez. He has many wonderful stories, and I had studied with him. And when I took a workshop with him, I asked him, or someone asked him, how do you write? What's your process? And he says, well, I sit down, I take a pen, take a piece of paper, and I write a word. If I like that word, I write a word next to it. And then if I like those two words, I write another word next to it. And then I have a novel. I don't know a better description of process than that. I mean, it's what you have to find is what is it that you are personally obsessed about. And it could be anything. It could be you're obsessed about how terrible the government is, or you're obsessed about driving a Mustang, but those things are the things that writers are groping with every day, is their personal obsessions. And what it is that keeps them up at night, what it is that makes them laugh, what it is that terrifies them. I sometimes tell writers that you really need to go deep down and examine the thing you're afraid of most and write about it. And sometimes, you don't want to. Sometimes I wake up, I don't want to either. But there comes a time when that voice that is asking you to examine your obsessions becomes so irresistible that you do sit down to do the work. So I would pay attention to the things that, I or you personally cannot live without. Sam Shepard has a wonderful play called Killer's Head, and it's about a man sitting in the electric chair. And you think, a man sitting in the electric chair, what's he thinking about? About the murder, about whatever. And he's sitting there obsessing about his truck. And it gets in minute detail as to the carburetor's not working, the workings of his truck. And then he gets electrocuted and he dies. But that's his obsession. And I always love that play because it is a perfect, examination of what an obsession can do. So that's what I would say. I hope that's helpful.
Next. Hello. I think you have been working on adaptation of the 100 Years of Solitude for a Netflix series, right? Which I find you are very brave for working on that. Could you tell us a little bit about that experience? I'm looking forward, to watch it. So.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's funny, when I heard that Netflix was doing 100 Years of Solitude, which is my favorite book, I said to myself, I'm not going to go watch that shit. No way. They're going to ruin it. It's going to be terrible. No one will understand the book the way it should be understood, and it's not going to work. And so Sara and other friends were like, think about that for a minute. And I thought, what, maybe I should try. Because I do understand that book, and I know it so well, and I love it so deeply. And the process was, I met with the producers, one of the producers at Netflix, and I said to him something I've never said to anyone in any meeting. I said, you know what, I'm perfect for this. And it's a thought I've often had, but never had the guts to say out loud. But I said, yes, I'm perfect for this. And I had brought to him a Bible of the series, which is a description of each episode, and so I had the receipts, to back it up, and they said, yes, you are perfect for this. And so that's I was hired before the pandemic started, more than 2 years ago, and I wrote the pilot and the first episode, and then the pandemic hit. And it was clear we were not going to have a traditional writer's room, the way TV is done. And so I said, look, I would be honored if you would let me write them all. And they said yes. They said that was okay. I finished 16 first drafts, and now I'm going back to do rewrites of all of them. But it's been a really rewarding experience. To be so intimately connected with a book of such beauty, and humor, and romance, and and all the things that people have loved about that book. Honestly, I know it better than I know my own work at this point. Yes, Bill.
What is your rewrite going to be about? Why do you feel that you have to rewrite the first 16 episodes, all 16 of them?
Yeah, good question. I think I don't want to. I have to. The producers have notes. Most of the notes are logistical. We're working within a budget, and it's really about trimming. The episodes tend to be about 52 pages long, trimming them to about 48 pages, which means, fewer locations and a more doable shoot. It's really that. I mean, there's a couple of things, and sometimes I fight with the producer because he tends to want to diminish the women's stories in the series. Like, why do we have to spend so much time with Rebecca? Why do we, and it's like my feeling is that the book, if it has a flaw, it's that the women characters don't have enough agency. And so I've been working over time to prop up their stories and give them more life. And so we tend to disagree on that. But I think I'm right about doing that for the book. But about like the big concepts, we don't have any disagreements. And about the structure of the series, we don't have any disagreements. Let me just say before the next question, Netflix has been, at least verbally, I think very honorable about this process. They want to shoot the series in Colombia. They want to shoot it in Spanish. They want to shoot it with mostly Colombian actors. And, the Colombian television business is very much soap operas, And they don't want soap opera stars. They don't want any stars. They don't want Gael Garcia Bernal. They don't want Javier Bardem. They don't want any person to take away from the true star, which is the book, which I think is really great on their part. And I hope that is what they do.
Hi, I was just wondering if you could tell me a little bit about what it was like to be published for the first time and the process that you went through.
The first time I was published was in 1983. So I had written a play called The House of Ramon Iglesia, and it was done at the Ensemble Studio Theater in New York with Giancarlo Esposito was in it, a young Giancarlo. It was great. I had been trying to get published forever, and had a stack of rejections. And finally, this play, which had won an award and then had a production, was finally in print. And it's funny because my parents. My dad was a janitor. My mom had a third grade education. They were not literary people at all. Didn't have any books except the Bible. And so they didn't really understand what it meant to be a writer. Why I wanted to do this and what it was. And so when we had the book, I could show them, there it was, tangible, solid, three-dimensional, with my name on it. And it was really the first time they understood what I was doing.
I had a question for Sara, actually. Maybe you could talk a little bit from an actor's standpoint, what it means to get inside. Two things I was especially noticing in what you just performed, the language and also the tone and the sensibility of Jose Rivera's work.
Yeah, now I've done so many of his works because it works. I understand it, and it is, I always say it's like a modern-day Shakespeare. That's just how it is to me. And for me, coming from a dance background, like very intense classical dance, his words are like music. So when I read them on the page, I know exactly how they should sound, and wherever I'm obviously rehearsing it gets better and better. But I hear them and I see them like almost on a staff. I see them bounce around. So for me, it's very musical, and I know how it's right and how it's not. And even like night after night when I give a performance, like I know what it should be and I know what I should do to get there. So yeah, it is music, and And once you follow those musical notes, you just get swept away with it. Especially, again, like doing something night after night, you really, obviously you get into it and you can relax into it. And you just let those words take you, and they're so colorful, and it is cosmic in a way. So it's a totally different approach, like doing, at least, especially this play that I just read from, that is very cosmic, and he has other things that are a little more normal, and so it's a different approach. But this is like a very colorful, heightened, musical, cosmic journey that you just like let the words take you on. Yeah, and I love it. I love it. Yeah.
And Jose, do you learn about your plays from the actors you collaborate with also, or?
Oh, completely. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I like in rehearsal. Just watching their faces, because their faces say a lot. Like if they're stuck on something, then I know that, oh, that must be something wrong in the texts. You know, if things just flow out of their mouths, then I feel, okay, I'm on the right track with what they're doing. And you know, I love smart actors that challenge you with good questions, and you know, and I've learned so much. And the thing is, you know, Sarah's being very modest, but I have written for her specifically at times because she is so good. Like her instincts with the rhythms of my speech are just so right that now it's become a two-way street where, okay, here's, you know, I think I copied you on the page, so.
Yep.
Yeah, some of this stuff is so uncanny. It's, I should be sued for plagiarism, but.
Yeah. Careful what you say around him.
Great.
Thanks. Hi. So being a Puerto Rican writer in New York in the 1980s, how do you think that you fit in with that era of New Yorican writers like Tato La Viera and others that I'm sure you were surrounded with and worked with and were inspired by?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I knew some of them. I knew Pedro Pietri, for instance. I didn't know Miguel Piñero well, but I'd met him a few times. Every time I met him, he wanted to borrow my car. I didn't fit in because I grew up on Long Island and I had a very different background. And these were men and women who had lived from, you know, El Barrio and the inner city and had grown up with very different experiences. You know, I was out chasing blue jays when I was a kid. You know, I didn't have those experiences, but we did share a love for the island and a sensibility about the culture that we all understood. But you know, it was much later in life that I was produced at the Neo-Rican Cafe, and those men had already passed out of the scene. But they were wonderful, generous. You know, Pedro especially, you know, was so beautiful, and I was very inspired by the Puerto Rican Obituary, his book of poems, and of course, you know, Short Eyes, and those works were incredibly important to me as growing up. You know, at that age, in my 20s, I didn't have many mentors, you know, who were of my background. These days, there are many more writers, you know, that are established and people can look up to. But when I was growing up, there was nobody really except for them. And Maria Irene Fornes was the other one. So, yeah, I mean, it was interesting because I loved what they were doing, but I knew I couldn't do what they were doing. That my sensibility as a writer would take me on a different path. I couldn't write about prison or heroin addiction or the kinds of things that some of these writers had experienced. I had to find another way, another language, in order to sort of mature as a writer. Yeah.
Hi, sorry though. Sorry that took so long. Anyway, I just wanted to ask if, because I know that as a writer sometimes like it's hard, when you get inspired by a specific thing, it's like, oh yeah, I definitely want to write about that. Is there any time that like, you maybe were hit with like an idea, like a strike of inspiration, you thought immediately like, oh yeah, like this is gonna be a good play, or like, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I try to find inspiration everywhere, every day, if possible, you know, and something out there will always get your attention, whether, you know, you're sitting on the subway and the person across the street has an interesting face and they're doing something, you know, and you think about why they do what they do, you know. I was driving through LA one time and I passed a pregnant hitchhiker who was standing on the side of the road in pouring rain. And I just passed her, you know, it didn't stop. But I kept wondering, you know, what would have happened if I had stopped? And that became the play Cloud Tectonics. So everything, and you never know. You never know what the thing will be that will trigger an entire play. And sometimes it's the most trivial things. You know, I have kids, so there was one night when my daughter, who was 8 years old, you know, came out of her bedroom late at night and walked into the living room. I said, honey, it's your bedtime. You should be in bed. And she like makes a face and she goes, I know, Daddy, but my brain people tell me I can stay up late if I want. And I said, very clever. Tell your brain people Daddy says it's bedtime. But that word stuck with me, and I wrote a play called Brainpeople eventually. So, you know, you just never know. You know, once I was reading books of mythology to my daughter, Greek and Roman mythology, and she said, Dad, you know, where do these stories come from? And I was tired. I didn't have a clever answer. And I said, honey, people make them up and write them down. And then she thought about it and says, well, I guess when giants want to write fairy tales, they put us in their books. And that became the title of a play. Giants have us in their books. So, you know, it's everywhere, anytime. And I mean, I don't know about you in terms of choreography, where you find inspiration from, or, you know, when you create a dance piece, you know, where your ideas come from. But
mostly from the music. Yeah. So it's an external inspiration.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So if you see things, I hear things.
Oh, okay.
Yes. So in that way, yeah. More of an audible inspiration.
Oftentimes, people are told like not to pursue art. Like it's often discouraged, like in our society. And you decided to pursue like playwriting in your early 20s. So this question is for the both of you, as like from an actor perspective and from a playwright perspective. What was the process like in terms of choosing to do art full time? And what advice would you give people who have interest in acting and writing?
Do you want to try that?
So I grew up as a very intense classical dancer, right? But it was fun. I went to regular high school and I did really well. And I went to college pre-med, and I was going to be a surgeon. And I was going to be very happy as a surgeon. I was very excited, and I did really well. But I was still dancing, and I was hanging out with the theater people, you know, on the side, and going to my chem labs and bio labs and whatnot. And I kept hanging out with them, and I was like, oh my God, they're really doing it. They're really doing it. And I thought, well, I'm a dancer. It's a very short lifespan. I thought, okay, I can only be young once. Let's go dance. So I changed my major. My parents almost disowned me, but they didn't. And that was it. So I graduated, and I worked as a dance director at a big school for a year, and then I moved to New York. So, and now I tell my students that story. So you never know. And then I never went back to school, obviously. I'm still doing it. Yeah. So, I mean, there was such a sharp change, and especially coming from my parents, it was they're science people, engineers, like, no, the art is not a job. You know, it's like, how are you going to make a living? I don't understand. So it was never an option. Yeah. And the other funny thing, and this gets my students too, they're your age, I didn't have so whatever you're doing, right? If you have, like for me it was dance. I did not have a dancer's body to do ballet, but all the people I was studying with, my friends all did. And they did it very intensively, and they were beautiful, and I always had to work 10 times harder to even try to look like them. And so I was like the most underestimated one. And I worked so hard that I was the one that moved to New York. Nobody else did. And I ended up dancing at the Met. So it's like this little tiny underdog like kept eking along. So you never know what's gonna happen if you keep, So I guess what I'm saying is don't be discouraged by people that think you should do something, and also people around you that may already have like a higher level or like an inclination or anything like that. Yeah, because I kind of like found my own way somehow.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I had advice to give for writers, I would say, like as Sara just said, don't compare yourself to other people. It's always going to be somebody who's further along, gets better reviews than you do, knows Spielberg and you don't, things like that. But as I said earlier, my father was a janitor and he drove a taxi. So I grew up with a real blue-collar work ethic. And I believe in work, and I believe in good, honest work. And I think of writing as good, honest work. And I approach it that way. I have hours. I'm going to fulfill my hours. If I'm hired to do something, I'm going to do the best job possible. I'm not just going to do it for the money. I'm going to do it for some kind of satisfaction that comes from having worked very hard at something you love. I think you have to love it. And I'm sure it's the same thing for actors and dancers. You have to love it because the business will break your heart 1,000 times a day. And it will feel unfair all the time. And a friend of mine who is she's 70 now, likens, she's an actress, her career to a bad relationship, And she says, oh no, an abusive relationship. That's how she called it. A theater's an abusive relationship. So, if you don't love it, you won't last. If you love it hard enough, you can turn that abuse around into something you can use. You can use the pain to motivate you. You could use the disappointment to inspire you to reach for greater heights. It sounds really corny, I know, and I'm sorry for that, but I do honestly believe that. I do believe in hard work, and I do believe rewards eventually happen. What I often tell writers is, especially those interested in film and Hollywood, is that a career in Hollywood is like standing on line at a ride in Disneyland. So you're on a line to get on the Cyclops or whatever the thing is, and there's 15 people in front of you. And you think, oh, piece of cake. This isn't hard. You get to the front of the line, you realize, oh, the line turns right, and now there are 25 people in front of you. And you get to the front of that line, now it turns left, and there are 100 people in front of you. And you think, I will never get to the ride. And that's what a career as a screenwriter's like. And I say to them, stay on the line. If you get off the line, you will never make the ride. You'll never make it. If you stay on the line, you will eventually, and I'm probably too Pollyanna about this, but I do believe if you stay on the line, you will make it eventually. I am a firm believer in the power of talent to rise to the occasion and to be noticed. And sometimes it takes 30, 40 years or whatever, I know you have a different view, or I mean,
it's a little too long for an actress.
A little too long, yes, for an actress. It's a different timeline, but I do think that the power to stick to something, despite everyone telling you can't do it, you shouldn't do it, you never make money, as I grew up, I never had a plan B. I never had another thing to fall on. Like in high school, I remember everyone took typing classes, and I decided I'm not going to take a typing class because I don't want to know how to type, because I don't want to have something to fall back on if I don't make it as a writer. I still can't do anything else.
It's true. Hi, as a fellow Boricua, I'm really happy to meet you and hear about your work, so muchas gracias. I wanted to ask you something really interesting because last time when I was teaching Spanish in Puerto Rico, you know that the big playwright that's known in the island is René Marquez. And I think my question is, how do you depart from him? How are you different from him? Because, you're not coming from the person who dies at the factory, even though you do come from migration. So how does that evolve into who you are today?
Yeah. Well, he was, great Puerto Rican hero, literary hero, not only in the theater, but also as an essayist. His essay, The Docile Puerto Rican, is very famous. He, for me, was a hero. But I also knew I can't do what he did. The structure of the ox cart going from the campo to the slums to New York is a brilliant structure, but it reflects a certain life that I didn't have. I was born in Puerto Rico, but I left when I was 4. So I didn't, we never lived in this, La Perla and the slums of San Juan. It's a bit like, I used to run in the track team at school, and I ran on the the relay team. And so somebody hands you the baton and then you run. That's how I feel with Marquez, that he had the baton. He gave voice to the Puerto Rican experience at a time when no one was doing it. And now I have a different baton and I'm running a different race. And I honor what he has done, but I cannot copy what he has done. I can never be what he is. And I've had my work in Puerto Rico, and it's been an incredible pleasure and an amazing experience to have your work there. But he is who he is. No one's going to knock him off the pedestal, and no one should even try.
Yes, it's a whole era.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you for all your great work. Kiss of the Spiderwoman was one of the more remarkable experiences I had seeing that. But I want to ask you about Motorcycle Diaries. How do you get something like about Che Guevara riding a motorcycle made it into a movie? That's kind of amazing.
Well, there's a little bit of backstory to that. Long before I was involved, in 1989, Robert Redford was in Havana, and he meets Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and the two are fans of each other. So Marquez loves Redford, Redford loves Marquez, and they talk about how can we work together. What can we do? What movie can we make together? And Marquez recommends to Redford, there's this book. You should read it. It's called The Motorcycle Diaries. And I think it would make a good movie. And so Redford read the book, and it was translated to English first. He read it in English. He agreed it would make a good movie. Many years passed. Many years passed. He didn't know the right filmmaker. And then, Walter Salles, the Brazilian filmmaker, made Central Station, and Central Station was nominated for an Academy Award, and Walter's profile went through the roof, and Redford realized, this is the filmmaker, because Central Station is partly a road film. And he recognized that Walter's sensibility would be the right sensibility to make this film. And Walter insisted that the film be shot in Spanish. Redford wanted it in English, but Walter says, if I'm going to do it, it's going to be in Spanish. And Redford, to his credit, said, yes, you're right. And so I was involved later when they pretty much had decided to go into development for the movie and were looking for a writer to write the script. And every agent in town submitted a screenplay to Walter. And I think I told this story earlier today. He didn't want to read all the screenplays, so he had his assistant read them, and she only liked mine out of literally a stack like this. And so that's how I came into the process. I read the book, and being a child of the 60s, of course I knew who Che Guevara was, and his role in the Cuban Revolution. And so Walter's sensibilities and my sensibilities, our politics, the way we saw film, were all like this. We agreed on virtually everything. And so I knew instantly this is somebody I want to work with. And I'd love Central Station. And I remember thinking, if Central Station has such a big heart and so full of love and humanity, I thought to myself, if this Walter guy is an asshole, I'm going to be so heartbroken. And then I met him, and he's everything. He's just like his movie, just full of humor and generosity. And so that's how our collaboration began. And it was, it was many, many, many months of research. I had to divorce my brain from what it knew about Che Guevara. Because I thought if I went into this process worrying about what I was going to do to the legacy or legend of Che Guevara, I wouldn't have been able to write anything. I had to put that aside. The same is true when I wrote the screen version of On the Road. I had to take Kerouac and put him aside, and all his fans and all the people who are going to hate my adaptation, and not think about it. And the same thing with 100 Years of Solitude. I can't put that kind of pressure on myself to please the fans. It just won't. I'll be paralyzed.
One or two more questions? Yeah.
Thank you. So I was curious, actually, talking of Garcia Marquez, you were mentioning that, the introduction mentioned that your grandparents told you a lot of oral stories. And my father is Colombian. I grew up with lots of stories, right? And it wasn't until I went to Colombia that I basically realized that magic realism was real. And I wonder if you can talk about maybe going to Puerto Rico, meeting Garcia Marquez, working on now the screenplay, how your relationship to magic realism has changed, and also, reading through and working on this beautiful work of literature, like you said, is it developing more this sense, or even what you call your mad realism, right? And is it becoming more real to you?
Yeah. Well, I think, when I read the book for the first time, it felt familiar. My grandfather used to tell a story when he was a little boy. There was a tree in his town, in Miraflores, where he lived. It had been planted by a conquistador. And my grandfather tells a story of one time he took a machete and he whacked the tree. And out of the tree sprang a conquistador that chased him around the town all day long. So those kinds of stories I had in my mind growing up all the time. And there was a time I went to Puerto Rico to visit my family, because I was living in the States, and a little kid came running up and said, "You have to go to Fulano's house. Something's going on at the house." So I went to the house, and there was a line of people waiting to get into the house, and I didn't stay on the line, but I found out that the owner of the house had hung himself and was hanging from the living room. And everybody had come to look at him. And people were standing online, eating food, it was... And I thought, this is magic realism, except it's not. It's real. And so those stories, I totally agree with you. I think the line between the two is so fluid. And I think part of the beauty of it is that, because people ask me many times, what is magic realism? And I say, look, I'm not a scholar, but what I think it is that sometimes reality reflects in the outside world what is happening in the inside of a person. So an example is in King Lear. The storm in King Lear, the big storm that happens, is a reflection of the inner storm that's going on inside his mind, that he's suffering. And that a lot of magic realism works that way, that these are reflections of the psychological state that the character finds themselves in. And they're also just fun. They're they're whimsical, they're so full of poetry and beauty that they become irresistible. In 100 Years of Solitude, there's a wonderful scene where Remedios the Beauty is hanging laundry. And suddenly a wind comes along, and she's holding onto the sheets, and she flies up into heaven. And she says, "Goodbye, everybody, goodbye." And that was such a beautiful representation of her purity and the fact that she never belonged on earth. She was always living in a whole other plane. And finally, Marquez makes that visible in the course of the book. And it will be a major scene in the series.
And is there any last final questions? Or that's a beautiful note to end on, actually. All right, thank you so much, Jose and Sarah.